Mayday, mayday, mayday! This is MT Pacific Sovereign, total loss of propulsion. We are drifting. Repeat, drifting broadside in the northern lane. Request assistance, we are blocked.
It doesn't announce itself. No flash, no shockwave, no column of fire rising from the Persian Gulf. Just silence. At 3:17 hours local time, the MT Pacific Sovereign, a 330-meter VLCC carrying 2.1 million barrels of Saudi crude, loses propulsion somewhere in the northern shipping lane of the Strait of Hormuz. The captain radios a malfunction. Engineers flood the engine room. Nothing is physically wrong. The ship is simply stopped. What the crew doesn't know, what no one on the surface knows, is that 37 minutes earlier, a device roughly the size of a refrigerator detached itself from the seafloor, rose silently through 60 feet of warm, murky water, and magnetically coupled to the vessel's hull directly beneath the propeller shaft. It drew no power from its own battery. It emitted no acoustic signature. It simply attached, like a parasite, and waited for the programmed moment to fire a shaped charge directly into the vessel's steering gear. The Pacific Sovereign is not sinking. It's drifting, broadside, across the narrowest navigable channel in the world. Behind it, 14 more ships are inbound. Ahead of it, 11 ships are outbound. The Strait of Hormuz is now effectively closed, and the blockade didn't begin with a declaration of war. It began with a whisper. This is Ground Zero Stories, and what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a tactical blueprint hiding in plain sight, the most dangerous maritime scenario in the history of modern geopolitics. Stay with us. Before we go further, if you want to understand the conflicts shaping your world before the mainstream media figures them out, subscribe to Ground Zero Stories right now. Hit the bell, turn on every notification, because history doesn't wait for anyone to catch up. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz is the single most powerful geographic leverage point on Earth, you have to understand the numbers. 21 miles. That's the width of the narrowest navigable passage. 21 miles, separating the Arabian Sea from the Persian Gulf and separating industrial civilization from collapse. The usable shipping lanes, 2 miles wide each, inbound, outbound, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Through those lanes passes approximately 20% of the world's total petroleum supply every single day. Roughly 17 million barrels of crude oil, liquefied natural gas from Qatar, enough to heat tens of millions of European homes. Petroleum products destined for Japan, South Korea, India, China. Every major Asian economy depends on the Strait of Hormuz, the way a human body depends on a jugular vein, which is precisely the problem. Now take everything the United States Navy represents: carrier strike groups, guided missile destroyers, Virginia-class submarines, the most sophisticated Aegis combat systems ever built, and compress all of that power into a body of water that averages just 100 feet in depth, some sections barely 50 feet. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower draws 37 feet of water. The tactical geometry of this strait makes her one of the most expensive targets in the history of naval warfare, not one of its most powerful weapons. Here's what military planners quietly call the swarm problem. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is engineered for deep water, blue water naval dominance, long-range engagements, carrier aviation projected across hundreds of miles, ballistic missile defense. These systems were designed in the Cold War logic of fighting the Soviet Navy in the North Atlantic: vast distances, deep water, clear threat vectors. In the Strait of Hormuz, every single tactical advantage inverts. Short engagement ranges collapse the reaction windows of Aegis. The shallow seabed creates horrific sonar conditions. Thermoclines don't exist. Acoustic interference is constant. Submarine detection becomes near impossible. The narrow choke point means that a carrier group cannot maneuver. It can only go forward or backward. And in those shallow, cluttered, mine-threatened waters, forward is exactly where Iran wants the US Navy to be. Let's talk about what Iran has actually spent the last 15 years building, not the propaganda, the hardware. UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles. Iran's domestically produced underwater drone program, confirmed by IRGC naval commanders and cross-referenced in declassified DIA threat assessments, has produced a class of small, low-observable autonomous vehicles capable of operating on pre-programmed missions for extended durations. Some variants are designed to sit on the seafloor in a dormant, low-power state for weeks or even months, waiting for an acoustic or magnetic trigger signature matching a preloaded target profile. Think of them as IEDs, but smart ones, underwater, with target discrimination software. In our scenario, Iran deploys between 200 and 400 of these devices across the Strait's shipping lanes in the weeks preceding the blockade. During a period of heightened but ambiguous tensions when rules of engagement, the ROE, don't yet authorize offensive action. By the time the Fifth Fleet recognizes the pattern, the minefield is already complete. The seafloor is seeded. Swarm tactics. This is where it gets brutal. The IRGC naval forces operate over 1,000 small fast attack craft, Boghamar-type speedboats, Paycap-class fast inshore attack craft, and semi-submersible vessels. Individually, none of them pose a serious threat to a U.S. destroyer. But that's not the point. The point is saturation. An Aegis combat system, the most sophisticated shipboard air and surface defense system ever built, can simultaneously track and engage a finite number of targets. Military analysts and open-source naval warfare specialists have spent years debating that exact threshold. The details remain classified, but the principle is simple mathematics. If you put more incoming threats into the engagement envelope than the system can process and engage simultaneously, the system is overwhelmed. Iran's doctrine calls for launching simultaneous swarm attacks from multiple vectors, North Shore, South Shore, and from civilian-flagged vessels already inside the strait. Each boat carries anti-ship missiles, rocket-propelled grenades, or simply a few tons of explosives in a floating-shaped charge. The goal isn't to sink a carrier. The goal is to force the carrier's defensive systems to prioritize, leaving gaps, and to make the cost of operating in the strait politically and operationally unsustainable. This is the doctrine, not invasion, exhaustion. The Fateh mine system. In Farsi, Fateh means conqueror. Iran has publicly displayed and acknowledged development of an intelligent naval mine system capable of passive target discrimination. Using acoustic signature libraries and magnetic field analysis, the system can, in theory, distinguish between the propulsion signature of a U.S. Navy destroyer and a civilian crude tanker. This is significant for one specific reason. It allows Iran to selectively target military assets while letting civilian vessels drift, creating a humanitarian crisis that paralyzes Western ROE. Because here's the trap. If the U.S. opens fire on ambiguous small boat contacts in a strait full of civilian tanker traffic, they risk killing civilians. If they don't fire, they take hits. Either outcome serves Iranian information operations. Either outcome is a win in the court of global opinion. The Fifth Fleet's response playbook is not a secret. Phase 1 is Mine Countermeasures, MCM. The U.S. deploys MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters with airborne mine-sweeping systems, Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships, and the newer Knifefish UUVs, autonomous underwater drones specifically designed to locate, identify, and neutralize bottom mines. In a conventional minefield, against conventional mines, this is effective. Against 300 dormant AI-assisted devices distributed across a 500-square-kilometer seabed in 50 feet of turbid, acoustically cluttered water, the math doesn't work. Not in hours, not in days. Each device requires individual localization, confirmation, and neutralization. The rate of clearance is measured in individual mines per day. The threat exceeds the capacity by an order of magnitude. Meanwhile, the carrier strike group sits outside the strait, because operating a $13 billion carrier inside a seeded minefield with swarm attack capability on both shores isn't tactics. It's a sacrifice. So instead, the strike group launches air operations. F-A-18s and F-35Cs strike IRGC naval bases along the Iranian coast. Tomahawk cruise missiles, launched from Burke-class destroyers positioned in the Gulf of Oman, hit radar installations, fast boat staging facilities, and coastal defense missile batteries. Iran absorbs the strikes and disperses. Their assets aren't concentrated. They've studied every U.S. air campaign since 1991. The IRGC naval forces operate from fishing villages, commercial docks, and pre-positioned caches along 1,500 kilometers of coastline. You cannot bomb a swarm back into a box. And here's where mission creep becomes existential. Every Tomahawk strike on Iranian soil is an act of war. Every Iranian retaliatory strike on a U.S. asset is an escalation. The ladder goes up fast, somewhere between targeted strikes on coastal assets and full-scale war with a nation of 88 million people backed by Russian air defense systems and Chinese diplomatic cover. There's a line. In the fog of this conflict, no one knows exactly where it is. One miscalculation, one civilian casualty event captured on video, one Iranian ballistic missile that gets through THAAD and strikes a U.S. ship, and the ROE collapses entirely. Let's talk about what happens to the world while the admirals argue about ROE. Day 1 of the blockade. Oil futures spike 40%. Day 3. Brent crude crosses $108 per barrel. Tanker insurance, war risk premiums, makes most commercial voyages economically non-viable. Shipping companies pull vessels from the region voluntarily. The blockade enforces itself. Day 7, $220 per barrel. Japan activates strategic reserves. South Korea halts industrial production at 17 major facilities. India's central bank calls an emergency session. Day 14, $270 per barrel. The S&P 500 has shed 22% in trading value. European governments are rationing heating fuel. Aviation fuel costs have grounded approximately 35% of global commercial flights. Day 30, $300 per barrel. The global economy doesn't just slow down. It begins structural failure. Supply chains built on just-in-time logistics, which assume constant, cheap energy, begin collapsing in cascade. Fertilizer production, which is energy-intensive, drops sharply. Food prices begin rising. In nations with limited foreign exchange reserves, that's not an economic problem. That's a famine trigger. Iran doesn't need to win a war. Iran needs the world to blink first, to call Washington and say, negotiate now, whatever it takes. And the brutal truth is this: the Strait of Hormuz gives one nation, a regional power with a GDP smaller than Norway's, the ability to hold the entire global industrial economy hostage, not because of their military strength relative to America's, because of geography, because of those 21 miles. So can the United States break a total Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz without a full-scale invasion? The tactical answer is yes, eventually, but not fast enough. The MCM timeline for clearing a sophisticated, distributed minefield of this type is estimated at a minimum of 3 to 6 weeks under optimal operational conditions. Those conditions don't exist in a contested strait under active swarm threat. Realistically, the clearance operation extends to 2 to 3 months, if it succeeds at all, before Iran reseeds cleared sections. Airstrikes degrade IRGC capability but cannot eliminate it. The Iranian Integrated Air Defense System, the IEDs, has been substantially upgraded with Russian S-300 and domestically produced Bavar 373 systems. U.S. stealth assets can penetrate it. But sustained air campaigns require sustained sorties, and each sortie is an escalation event in a conflict with no defined end state. The only guaranteed military solution is a ground invasion to physically seize the Iranian coastline, an operation that would dwarf Operation Iraqi Freedom in scale, cost, and consequence. This is the new reality of naval warfare. The era of blue water dominance guaranteeing freedom of navigation is over. The proliferation of precision anti-ship missiles, autonomous underwater systems, swarm doctrine, and intelligent mines has created what strategists call area denial, zones where even a superior conventional force cannot operate freely. The new rules are written not in carrier tonnage, but in mine count, swarm size, and the acoustic signature library of a $50,000 autonomous device sitting silently on a muddy seafloor. The Pacific Sovereign is still drifting, the lane is still blocked, and the clock is running. Now here's the question. Ground Zero Stories is putting directly to you. Can the global economy survive a 30-day blockade of the Strait of Hormuz? Because the admirals have war-gamed this, the economists have modeled it, and the answer keeps the people who understand it awake at 3 in the morning. Drop your answer in the comments, debate it, challenge it, and if you want to understand the next crisis before it happens, subscribe to Ground Zero Stories. Share this video with someone who thinks geopolitics is someone else's problem. It isn't. It never was. Ground Zero Stories, out.